on behalf of Rebecca and the CDFA, I am beyond pleased to introduce Maddie. Maddie is a doctoral student in UNH's Natural Resources and Rural Studies program. I'm also a fellow alum as well. Shout out to that program, which is wonderful. Maddie has been a tremendous resource for the Community Development Finance Authority this summer as they work to implement a new initiative focused on investment in community center infrastructure. Maddie is an intrinsic member of their team, and her inquisitive, thoughtful, and focused approach to her work is of great benefit as they establish program process and guidelines. She provides innovative, lasting ideas, including the potential for catalyzing their work through story maps, which could increase access to all of the CDFA's data work. Thanks so much to Maddie for your ability to guide the CDFA, and more broadly speaking, the state of New Hampshire, in discussion around the definition of what, when we talk about community centers, what are we talking about, and helping us to measure and ultimately scale up the potential positive impact of these centers on our communities. And with that, I will hand it off to Maddie.
Great. Thank you so much, Debev, for that wonderful introduction. So I'm Maddie, and this summer I had the pleasure of working with the New Hampshire Community Development Finance Authority. For those who may not be familiar with them, CDFA supports the development of vibrant and resilient communities by providing financial resources to municipalities and nonprofits. And my work with them primarily surrounded the development and piloting of an inventory of communities across the state. This work is important to CDFA because they want to ensure that New Hampshire facilities are developed and improved to meet community needs in a changing world. New Hampshire has 234 separate municipalities, and we know that there are groups who currently don't have community facilities that meet their needs. So the goal of this work is to help change that in the future through creating a centralized inventory of community centers. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I dig into my work, I just want to take a minute to explain why we're looking at community centers. And it starts with the American Rescue Plan Act. So think of this as a big pie, and a slice of that pie was allocated to the New Hampshire Fiscal Recovery Fund. And then a slice of that slice was allocated to the Community Center Investment Program by the Governor's Office for Emergency Relief and Recovery, because the pandemic revealed that there's a need for more community centers across the state. So the goal of this program is to support infrastructure development and improvement to those community spaces. And CDFA was contracted to administer the program. But first, CDFA had to define what exactly was going to qualify as a community center. The definition that they landed on was any publicly accessible facility that intentionally offers multiple services to the community as a part of its primary purpose. And so this past spring, 45 applications were received, and 16 of them were recommended for funding. You can see that on the map on the right. The blue ones were recommended, those little stars, and the red ones not recommended. And what we saw was that the logistics associated with this community center investment program really emphasized this need for one centralized inventory of community centers. And so that's where my work comes into play. Next slide, please. So my work this summer consisted of two phases. The first was the process of creating a methodology. And I like to think of that phase as building a foundation from different stones of knowledge. You can see the sources of knowledge that I used on the left and how they all kind of started to zip together towards the end. Phase two of my work was to pilot the methodology because we want to make sure this actually works. So I did this with 3 municipalities. The first one was Portsmouth because they're a socioeconomically strong community, and it's also right next door to where I live. I'm in Kittery, Maine. And then for the next 2 pilots, I tried to choose areas that were representative of other parts of New Hampshire and different levels of socioeconomic health. So I chose Rochester to represent an inland city and Belmont to represent a more rural area that didn't contain a major hospital or an airport. The results from each separate pilot are listed on the right, and as well as like how many community centers they contained. But where the data really started to become interesting was when the pilots were compared to each other. While they have similar numbers of community centers, they had very different numbers of possible facilities or organizations that could qualify as a CDFA community center. There were 13 in Belmont, 79 in Rochester, and over 240 in Portsmouth. And then when this information was cross-referenced with other CDFA metrics, the inventory really helped to start to show where there were specific areas of need, what the communities and municipality could use some more support. Now, this is just a pilot, but I think the value in the inventory will only continue to grow as it's completed. Next slide, please. So what's next? My time with CDFA is coming to a close, but the framework I created will allow the next round of fellows to dive right into collecting data for the remaining 231 municipalities. Once the inventory is complete, it can go out to the municipality leaders with a follow-up survey, asking them to add anything we may have missed. They know their communities best, and we really want to ensure that they have a voice in this process. Finally, the inventory can be converted into a map and then shared back out with the communities. And to me, it's this last step that really makes this work meaningful. There's immense value in sharing and collecting data because it's empowering. And I think there's a reason that the UN goal specifically says developing sustainable cities and communities rather than building them. We develop a community by empowering its citizens. And in my time with CDFA, I've seen that they do an excellent job supporting and empowering communities. And I'm incredibly thankful to have had the opportunity to work with them. Thank you so much.
All right, well done, Maddie. Thank you so much for that great presentation. It really comes through to me that you spent a lot of time on this summer, and it sounds like a very complex project with a lot of outreach and a lot of engagement and a lot of questions and a lot of data mining. So congratulations, and it sounds like you've really set up the next fellow or next person with CDFA to step in and continue this project forward and researching where the rest of the community centers eligible for the funding might be located. Any questions from our advisory group team?
I have one. So Maddie, this is such important work. I loved working with you on this. I think this is amazing. And as we talked about all summer and before, this is really textured and challenging work. The good news is that there's so much to do. Well, I guess that's good news and bad news. The challenging part is, being able to really do it in a way that's actionable and actually gets things, to become something that we want to. So I guess I'm just curious from your perspective, what would you say is a couple of the big things for the next fellow as you pass us the baton, the next fellow to do the work and get this inventory completed? What should they look out for?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really great question. Part of what I started to see across the pilots is that each town has a different way of reporting out what they have. And probably, as you would expect like really different levels of capacity in terms of how they are able to maintain their publicly accessible data. And so to whoever the fellows coming in to do this work next, I would say, be ready to be a little creative. Like how I looked at Portsmouth was different from how I looked at Belmont. Sometimes I ended up digging into the town Facebook page more than the town website because it's a lot easier to update a Facebook page than it is to necessarily update a town website, and you can delegate that out amongst multiple people. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice to the fellows is like, be creative. Yeah. Get ready for a little bit of a puzzle. It's kind of like a treasure hunt. And I think that's what makes it fun. So yeah.
That's cool, Maddie. Thank you.
Thanks, Maddie. I think it's encouraging to hear that the ability to and the opportunity to have creativity and integrate that into a position. So hopefully somebody will take that up in the next couple months or next year. I think we have time for maybe one last question before we move on to our last presentation.
Sure. I think, again, this project is so needed, like all the projects. This is such a great collection of projects, I think. But as you were talking about the metrics you put together, the sort of way you're looking at the data, would you like to say a little bit more about that? Like, how did you wind up deciding on those pieces? Did you look at various examples and kind of work backwards, or kind of a mix of a lot of approaches?
Sure. Yeah. So just to clarify, are you asking the metrics that qualify it as a community center?
Yeah. Well, and you had the stones over there on the left, you were kind of looking at as your framework.
Yeah. So for those, it was an organic process that I think I early on described it as investigative reporting. So it started with one stone, which was the Boston Centers for Youth and Families. And it started, that was from Devev actually sent that over to me, and he's like, here's an example of someone who's doing this really well. It's like, great, let's see what they have to offer. And then from there, it went next to the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. And that came from Katie. And she was like, this isn't exactly the same, but I think they're doing a really good job. And peeling back how they did it and looking at, it starts to get like really nerdy, but like peeling back the spreadsheet that they used to create their map had a lot of information on how to frame out what I was doing. And it just ended up being like turning over one stone and seeing like what it led to next. And that's how I came across those 5 elements in there.
Such a great process, and actually that investigative way of figuring it out and then using it as a tool is really interesting. So great project.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Maddie.